In the late 1930s, deep within the guarded shipyards of Kure, Japan, a secret unlike any other was taking shape. Steel plates thicker than anything seen before, guns so large that no human could stand beside their barrels without feeling dwarfed. Japan's admirals dreamed of an invincible weapon, a floating empire of steel that would crush the American Navy before it even reached their shores. They called it Yamato, and it would become both their greatest pride and their inevitable coffin. When the world was still blind to the full scale of Japan's ambition, the Imperial Navy had already begun plotting its ultimate trump card. In 1937, the treaty limitations that once capped the size of warships had begun to crumble. Japan, no longer content to play by Western rules, withdrew from the agreements that had kept the world's navies in check. In the shadow of Mount Kure, engineers and naval architects gathered around secret blueprints that defied every law of shipbuilding known to man. The concept was audacious. If Japan could not outbuild America in numbers, it would outbuild them in power. Each Japanese super battleship would be so formidable that it could destroy multiple American ships in a single engagement. No nation on Earth would dare challenge a fleet protected by the Yamato class. Construction began under a shroud of secrecy. The entire dock was hidden beneath towering walls and covered roofing, a steel cathedral built to conceal a steel god. Every rivet, every plate was forged under silence. Workers were forbidden to speak of what they saw. Even the emperor himself was briefed only in fragments. The numbers alone were staggering. 70,000 tons of displacement. 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval artillery ever mounted on a warship. Armor up to 16 inches thick, designed to shrug off any shell or bomb that dared strike her hull. The Yamato could fire a shell weighing 1.5 tons over 20 miles, far beyond the reach of any American ship at the time. She was not built merely as a ship. She was built as a symbol, the physical manifestation of Japan's imperial spirit. Unyielding, unbreakable, divine. But as Japan's engineers pushed steel and machinery to their limits, the world beyond the shipyard was changing faster than they could imagine. In the skies above Europe, aircraft were rewriting the rules of war. Bombers could strike fleets from beyond the horizon. Torpedo planes could sink ships that once ruled the oceans. The age of the battleship was dying, and Japan was unknowingly investing its soul in a relic. Still inside the Imperial Navy's halls, confidence reigned. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, believed in the spirit of surprise. He saw the Yamato as the empire's insurance policy, the blade that would cut through any American counterattack. No one dared question the cost. The pride of the emperor himself demanded it. December 16, 1941, just 9 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Yamato slid down the ways into the cold waters of the inland sea. She was the most powerful warship ever built. Her presence alone was meant to send shivers down the spine of any enemy admiral. Crowds of workers, exhausted and awed, watched the massive hull float free. To them, it was the birth of a legend. To history, it was the first step toward tragedy. The Yamato's sister ship, Musashi, was already taking shape. Even larger, even more heavily armored, she represented Japan's doubling down on the belief that naval supremacy still belonged to those who commanded the seas with guns, not aircraft. Yet even as the Yamato embarked on her first sea trials, Japan's naval strategists faced a grim reality. The Pacific Ocean was too vast, too unpredictable, and too vulnerable to air attack for a single ship, no matter how powerful, to dominate it. The Yamato was fast for her size, but still slow compared to the reach of carrier-based planes. Her guns could obliterate anything on water, but they could not touch what flew above. And Japan's carrier fleet, The true cutting edge of naval warfare was already being hunted. By 1942, Japan's initial victories began to falter. At the Battle of Midway, the Empire lost 4 of its frontline aircraft carriers in a single, devastating blow. The balance of power shifted overnight. While Japan still had the Yamato, the Musashi, and their mighty guns, they suddenly lacked the air cover needed to protect them. The super battleships were trapped too precious to risk, yet too slow to matter. Inside the Imperial Navy's command rooms, arguments broke out. Some officers begged to unleash the Yamato, to send her into battle, and strike fear into the Americans before it was too late. Others warned that losing her would break Japan's spirit. For months she sat anchored, a sleeping giant too valuable to awaken. Her vast engines idle, her crew restless, her guns silent. Even when she did move, it was rarely to fight. She was used instead as a flagship, a floating fortress for admirals, a monument to power that could not be used. While smaller, cheaper American ships filled the Pacific by the hundreds, Japan's 2 masterpieces remained mostly in harbor, waiting for a war that no longer existed in the form they had been built to fight. The battleship age was over. But Japan refused to believe it. By 1943, whispers of doubt had begun to spread through the ranks. Some officers called the Yamato the Emperor's ghost ship. Others called her a temple of death. Her fuel consumption alone was monstrous, enough to power an entire destroyer fleet. Every time she left port, she drained resources Japan could no longer afford. But the Imperial Navy held onto her as if she were sacred. They believed one day, when the tide of war turned dark, the Yamato would rise, and her 18-inch guns would restore honor to the fleet. No one realized the cruel irony. The very weapon meant to protect Japan's empire would soon become the symbol of its destruction. In the coming years, the Yamato and Musashi would both sail toward destiny, not as victors, but as martyrs. The oceans that once promised Japan glory would instead swallow its greatest creations whole. The Americans would call them monsters of steel. The Japanese would remember them as sacred graves. The sun had not yet set on the Empire of Japan, but its reflection was already sinking beneath the waves. As the Pacific War raged on, the great dreams that had birthed Japan's super battleships began to crumble beneath the relentless tide of American air power. The year was 1944, and the Empire of Japan was bleeding on every front. Once proud carriers lay smoldering beneath the Pacific, cities burned under the glow of enemy firebombs, and the mighty Yamato remained anchored like a caged beast, her guns silent, her crew waiting for a battle that never came. The Musashi, her colossal sister, would not be so idle. She was sent to sea as part of Admiral Kure's fleet, bound for Leyte Gulf, a last-ditch effort to repel the American invasion of the Philippines. It was here in October 1944 that the illusion of invincibility shattered forever. On the morning of October 24th, a wave of more than 200 American aircraft descended from the sky, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, fighters, a storm of steel and fire that the Musashi could not escape. She fought valiantly, her massive guns firing at shadows in the clouds, her anti-aircraft batteries filling the sky with desperate bursts of flame, but the heavens were too many. Torpedo after torpedo ripped into her hull, bombs punched through her decks, the ocean swallowed her strength. As the sun set, the sea around her turned black with oil and blood. The pride of Japan listed slowly to port, her great guns pointing uselessly at the horizon, and then she slipped beneath the waves, taking over 1,000 souls with her. Those who survived looked back and saw only bubbles and smoke where a legend had once floated. The news of her loss was buried in silence. Even the emperor was told in whispers. Yet the lesson was clear. Armor could not stop air power and steel could not outlast the sky. Still, Japan clung to its fatting symbol. The Yamato, untouched and massive, was held back once again, a weapon too holy to risk, too costly to use. But time and war showed no mercy. By 1945, Japan's empire had shrunk to a few islands, its navy shattered, its skis owned by the enemy. The Yamato, now stripped of purpose, sat moored at Kure, her crew watching the horizon as American bombers drew ever closer. Every man aboard knew what the command would one day be: a final voyage not to victory but to death. When the order came, it was codenamed Operation Tengo, a suicide mission disguised as strategy. The Yamato was to sail south toward Okinawa, with barely enough fuel to reach her target and none to return. She would beach herself on the shore, turn her 9 guns toward the enemy, and die in a blaze of honor. Every sailor aboard knew they were not going to fight, they were going to die. Yet no one refused. On April 6, 1945, the great ship slipped from Kure's harbor one last time, her decks lined with cherry blossoms, her flag fluttering in the cold wind. It was said that as she passed the coast, fishermen bowed in silence, watching their nation's pride vanish into the gray horizon. Behind her steamed a handful of escorts, destroyers that could barely protect themselves. The fleet moved south, a ghost armada heading toward destiny. High above, American scouts had already spotted them. The stage was set for the final act of the battleship era, a confrontation not between navies, but between a dying giant and the skis that would claim her forever. At dawn on April 7, 1945, the waters south of Kyushu were calm, too calm, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. The Yamato, the pride of Japan, advanced steadily toward Okinawa, her enormous silhouette cutting through the morning haze like a drifting fortress. Below deck, over 3,000 men prepared for what they all knew was a one-way journey. The crew polished brass fittings, manned gun stations, and tied headbands bearing the rising sun. There was no illusion of survival. They had been told their mission was to fight until the ship could no longer float, to die gloriously for the Emperor. As the hours passed, the drone of distant aircraft grew louder. At first, just a whisper on the horizon. Then a roar. Over 300 American planes from Task Force 58 had found their target. Dive bombers and torpedo bombers, escorted by fighters, descended like a swarm of iron locusts. The Yamato's radar screens lit up with chaos. Alarms wailed through her corridors. The air defense guns opened fire, spitting streams of flame and shrapnel into the sky. The first wave struck from port. Torpedoes slammed into the hull, throwing men from their feet, flooding the lower decks. Then came the bombers, their payload screaming downward, tearing through armor once thought impenetrable. Black smoke rose from her decks as explosions chained one into another. Still, she did not die. The crew fought on, bloodied and deafened, hauling shells as the guns roared defiantly at the heavens. Officers barked orders drowned by thunder. Men ran through corridors of fire, carrying their comrades or dousing the flames with their bare hands. But the sky would not relent. A second wave came, then a third, hundreds of planes attacking from every direction, circling the dying giant like vultures over a carcass. Another torpedo struck near the magazines, then another. The Yamato began to list heavily to port. Water rushed through torn compartments, extinguishing fires even as new ones erupted above. The order to abandon ship came too late. The great battleship's tilt grew steeper, her towering guns now half submerged. Inside, hundreds of men were trapped, praying, shouting, some whispering their final words to the Emperor. At 2:23 p.m., a massive internal explosion ripped through the hull. A pillar of flame and smoke rose 6,000 feet into the air, a black mushroom cloud seen more than 100 miles away. When it cleared, there was nothing left but an oil-slicked sea and fragments of steel. Over 3,000 crewmen perished. Only a few hundred were pulled from the water, dazed and broken, their uniforms scorched, their faces empty. The Yamato, once the largest warship in human history, was gone in less than 2 hours. In Tokyo, the news was sealed in secrecy. To the people of Japan, the Yamato had not been destroyed, she had ascended, fulfilling her duty. The Imperial Navy called it an honorable sacrifice, but those who knew the truth understood the terrible symbolism. The Yamato's destruction marked not just the end of a ship, but the end of an era, the death of the battleship itself. The ocean that had once been Japan's protector had become its grave. In that moment, the age of steel giants gave way to the age of the sky. Air power had rendered naval superweapons obsolete, and the very concept of sea dominance was forever changed. In the years after the war, divers and historians would visit the site where she sank, a silent plain of twisted metal resting deep beneath the waves. There in the cold darkness, the Yamato still sleeps, her massive guns half buried in the seabed, her name etched into eternity. For some, she remains a symbol of courage and craftsmanship. For others, a haunting reminder of pride and blindness. What began as a dream of invincibility ended as a floating coffin, a monument to a nation's unyielding will and its fatal refusal to see the future. The Yamato's brief life was not just a story of war, but of humanity itself, how greatness can turn to tragedy when power blinds wisdom. As the Pacific waves roll endlessly above her, the legend of the Yamato endures not as a triumph, but as a warning. A warning that no empire, no weapon, no dream of steel can defy the tide of time. The sea forgets nothing, and somewhere in its depths, the last echo of the world's greatest battleship still whispers through the silence. Here lies Yamato, the pride of Japan, and the tomb of an age.